Now's the part where we get good and retarded. Get good and retarded. Don't be shy. You have many of Aunt Nonnie's scented cigarettes. Get on the train. Next stop. But what the eldest said, he presently understood the subject of their conversation was wishes. For, she said, since we are talking about wishes, mine shall be to have the Sultan's baker for my husband. For then I shall eat my fill of that bread, which by way of the excellence is called the Sultan's. Let us see if your tastes are as good as mine. For my part, replied the second sister, I wish I was wife to the Sultan's chief cook, for then I should eat of the most excellent dishes, and as I am persuaded that the Sultan's bread is common in the palace, I should not want any of that. Therefore you see, addressing herself to the eldest sister, that I have a better taste than you. The youngest sister, who was very beautiful, and had more charms and wit than the two elder, spoke in her turn. For my part, sisters, she said, I shall not limit my desires to such trifles, but take a higher flight. And since we are upon wishing, I wish to be the emperor's queen consort. I would make him after father of a prince. I would make him father of a prince, whose hair should be gold on one side of his head and silver on the other. When he cried, the tears from his eyes should be pearls, and when he smiled, his vermilion lips should look like rosebud, fresh blown. The three sisters' wishes, particularly that of the youngest, seemed so singular to the Sultan that he resolved to gratify them in their desires. But without communicating his design to his Grand Vizier, he charged him only take notice of the house, and bring the three sisters before him the following day. And on loan from Mbate Oscaria, from Stephen King, The Eyes of the Dragon. Once, in a kingdom called Delian, there was a king with two sons. Delian was a very old kingdom, and it had had thousands, hundreds of kings, perhaps even thousands. When time goes on long enough, not even historians can remember everything. Roland the Good was neither the best nor the worst ever to rule the land. He tried very hard not to do anyone great evil, and mostly succeeded. He also tried very hard to do great works, but unfortunately he didn't succeed so well at that. The result was a very mediocre king. He doubted if he would be remembered long after he was dead, and his death might come at any time now. because he had grown old, and his heart was failing. He had perhaps 1 year left, perhaps 3. Everyone who knew him, and everyone who observed his grey face and shaking hands when he held court, agreed that in 5 years, at the very most, a new king would be crowned in the great plaza, at the foot of the Needle, and it would be only 5 years with God's grace. So everyone in the kingdom, from the richest baron to the most foppishly dressed courtier, to the poorest serf and his ragged wife, thought and talked about the king in waiting, Roland's elder son, Peter. And one man thought and planned and brooded on something else, how to make sure that Roland's younger son, Thomas, should be crowned king instead. This man was Flag, the king's magician. Now, we can take an early warning not to employ magicians in our court. Magicians or mages, if you will, we've no use for them. Their trickery is not welcome in here. If you come bearing gifts as a musician, that is another matter, and we will discuss your prompt service. Although Roland the king was old, he admitted to 70 years, but was surely older than that. His sons were young, and he had been allowed to marry late because he had met no woman who pleased his fancy, and because his mother, the great dowager Queen of Delian, had seemed immortal to Roland and to everyone else, and that included her. She had ruled the kingdom for almost 50 years when, one day at tea, she put a freshly cut lemon in her mouth to ease a troublesome cough that had been plaguing her for a week or better. At that particular time, a juggler had been performing for the amusement of the dowager queen and her court. He was juggling 5 cunningly made crystal bowls. Just as the queen put the slice of lemon into her mouth, the juggler dropped one of his glass spheres. It shattered on the tiled floor of the great east courtroom with a loud report. The dowager queen gasped at the sound. When she gasped, she pulled the lemon slice down her throat and choked to death very quickly. 4 days later, the coronation of Roland was held in the Plaza of the Needle. The juggler did not see it. He had been beheaded on the executioner's block behind the Needle 3 days before that. A king without heirs makes everybody nervous, especially when the king is 50 and balding. It was thus in Roland's best interest to marry soon, and to make an heir soon. His closest adviser, Flag, made Roland very aware of this. He also pointed out that at 50, the years left to him in which he could hope to create a child in a woman's belly were only a few. Flag advised him to take a wife soon, and never mind waiting for the lady of noble birth who would take his fancy. If such a lady had not come into view by the time a man was 50, Flag pointed out, she probably never would.